Hi, I'm Brady Weldon. Welcome to the Path to Freedom. You know, life is full of choices. Life is full of choices that we have to make as we walk a path of life. Every human being is on a journey. We're all on individual paths. We're trying to get to the place of peace, forgiveness, purpose in life. And every person has to encounter some stops along the way. You probably can think of heroes that you've had in your life. I know I have many. Those people who have impacted you for good, for God, for purpose for yourself. And in strict times or bad times, you suddenly think about their influence on your life. I can think of no greater hero than the person of Jesus Christ in my life. The Son of God who left heaven's throne. The Bible says in the book of John that He became flesh and dwelt among us. In a moment of time, God Himself came to this planet to bear the sins of humanity and to pay our sin debt as we walk the path of life. Well, in looking at our own path, we get to identify with also the path that Jesus Himself walked. In this path to freedom journey that we're going to take, we're going to stop along the path that Christ took as He went to Calvary's cross. And as we stop, we're going to identify. We're going to identify with the weak ones, the weary ones, the crushed ones, the ones who collapse. And it will hopefully strengthen our lives as we think about what God's Son has done for us. Now, I want you to know, before we even begin, this is not a journey that's going to be religious in nature or legalistic. This is a journey for not the faint-hearted, but the strong-hearted. And God says in His Word that when Jesus Christ came to this planet, He did it to set humanity free. So we're going to go through valleys, mountaintops, all kinds of places on the path that God has set for all of us. But hopefully and prayerfully, if God's Son came to this planet to set humanity free, maybe, just maybe, He'll set you free too. So come on, let's check it out. I was at an art gallery one day and I was looking and I noticed this beautiful painting that caught my eye. It was a picture of a heart that was exposed outside of a body. It looked like a bruised apple and it was circled with thorns. And light was coming out of the middle of this heart, the pierced place. And through the wound, it was bleeding, but light was coming through. I was amazed as I stood there and looked at it, and I began to think about how the Son of God, Jesus Christ, through His wounds, we receive the light of God. What an amazing opportunity for human beings to understand today that the path that God's Son walked for us was a path that would cause Him to be wounded, be suffering, on a daily basis. While He's healing, He's suffering, that through His wounds we could be healed. It was still beating. Jesus had a bleeding heart. We say that today, He has a bleeding heart, she has a bleeding heart. But the truth of the matter is that Jesus Christ had a bleeding heart. He bled love, He bled forgiveness, He bled healing and deliverance for those as He walked on the path of life and would come in contact with. He could have done anything. He could have sat down and just accepted who He is and what He's about. But I'm so thankful today that Jesus Christ accepted this call to commit to the path of coming to this earth. He already had a broken heart. He loved the suffering ones. He loved the pierced ones. He loved the sinful ones, the shattered ones, and He even loved the self-righteous ones. I mean, if you can imagine with me today that Jesus suddenly comes to this earth And imagine that the one who created all of light out of darkness would make his most creative act the moment when he bled for those who need salvation. See, when our hearts are broken, I don't know about you, but we sometimes hope that our hearts can be threaded back with thread and love and peace and forgiveness. The truth of the matter is, a lot of times our hearts are knitted back by thorns, and we wonder if we wouldn't be better off dead. I'm sure that I'm talking to many people who are like me. I want the pathway of life to be good. But if you want success, you have to commit to walking sometimes a path in which you're going to fall, you're going to have rocks. And our Christ, the Lord Jesus, accepted the weight. He accepted everything that the cross, the pathway to Calvary, would offer Him. And He accepted that weight. And I think He accepted the weight of the cross and everything it would entail for Him so that He could understand, and He could understand, that you could understand, that He knows that even though life is tough and even though life gets rough, we commit to it because He was committed for us. That's what God does. That's what He does. Even though it crushes us, even though to commit moves us to places of pain and heartache, He would carry His cross because He knew that there would be an amazing amount of crosses that would come into our lives. You know, we carry weight on our lives every day. We carry gashes on our back and gashes in our heart. We have questions. One of the greatest questions in the path of committing is the path where we ask in that moment, why? Why is this happening to me? Let's talk about it. The question is why? Why am I in this place? When Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, there was a sense of committing to the path of the cross. He took 3 of His disciples. He goes into this garden and He gets down on His face by a rock. And He actually goes on a little bit further. And when He gets down by this rock, He starts saying, Lord, if there's any way that You can take this bitter cup from me, I want You to take it from me. Heaven is silent. God doesn't respond. In other words, there is no other way. The question becomes, why do I have to go through this? Isn't that the question of humanity? Why? I'm sure you've asked that question. I have too. Why did I lose my father to cancer? Why did my child die in the automobile accident? Why did my spouse cheat on me? Why did my mom get leukemia? Why? We stop long enough in this first stage to say on the path toward freedom, we have to first commit. But to commit to something means you will ask the question, why am I having to go through this? We stop long enough to ask the questions. We stop long enough to feel the pain, to believe that there's still gain, the type of gain that you gain after coming out of a dark cave into a beautiful sunlight. Someone once said that you cannot carry a cross in company. You can only carry a cross by yourself. But when you carry a cross and the weight of it is on your shoulders, you feel the weight of your own questions. The Romans were the ones who perfected crucifixion. The very word crucifixion actually came to mean out of the cross. It was the most inhumane form of execution ever invented by humanity. And the great thing about a moment like this is that Jesus Christ committed to it. That commitment was to bear the sin of all humanity on that cross. A theologian once said, there's 2 things you know about a man that was carrying a cross on his back. Number one, you knew he was bearing the weight of his own sin, his own crime. Criminals were crucified. Number two, you knew that when that person was bearing a cross on his back, walking out of the city gates, you knew he was never coming back. Well, Jesus Christ bore every sin, every pain, every abuse, everything in your life. Think about it this way. The moment Christ was hung on Calvary's cross, every sin in your life was in the future. Abuse, failure, things done to you, things you've done to yourself, all of it was future in that moment. And Jesus didn't wince, he committed to it. You know, he didn't do anything halfway. Jesus didn't heal halfway. You never heard of a leper coming back sometime after saying, "Hey Jesus, my spots are coming back." He didn't redeem halfway. He didn't heal halfway. He didn't feed halfway. And when it came to salvation, he accomplished it completely, committed to the end. That's King Jesus. And that's what he did for you. Years ago, I knew of a man who lived in a metropolitan city, but he actually lived in a little village right beside the city. He could walk out his front door. There was a doctor's office. There was a park right across the street from him, grocery store, all kinds of amenities right there. He'd gone to the doctor's office for some blood tests because he wasn't feeling very well. And he got up one morning and he walked right across the street to the doctor's office. He went in the doctor's office and the test results had come back. He had full-blown HIV/AIDS. In that moment, his testimony came back that he was devastated, of course. But he said something that was rather interesting when I heard him speak at a conference. He said, "When I walked out of the doctor's office, suddenly the sun was shining brighter. The children who were playing in the playground across the street from the doctor's office, suddenly," he said, "those sounds of those children were just the most beautiful sounds in the world. The hot dog stand on the end of the corner down there." He said, "I used to hate the smell of hot dogs. All of a sudden, the hot dog stand smelled wonderful, smelled beautiful." In the face of death, he decided it was a good day to start living again. That even though he had a sense of condemnation of his life was condemned to die, he decided it was a good day to start living. Jesus was condemned to die. The Bible says that he stood before Pilate, and Pilate condemned him to death. I love the scripture that says that Jesus was condemned to die, but he stood before Pilate. He may have been condemned to die, but he stood. And today, he still stands, doesn't he? Even right now, he stands by the bedside of a woman who's overdosed on pills. He stands by the graveside of parents who have had to bury their children so quickly in life, 8, 9 years of age. He stands in a nursing home beside the bedside of somebody who is elderly, who has lost their life. No children, no grandchildren come and visit them. Jesus stands. And as you and I walk the path of life, sometimes there's moments of condemnation. We condemn ourselves. We condemn others. And as we walk this path sometimes, I wonder sometimes if the ground we stand on is the same ground he stands on. Now the question becomes, not just where Jesus stands, but where do we stand? I think sometimes we need to check our feet while we're walking the path to see where we stand. Where do we stand on areas of truth? Where do we stand in areas of loving people and helping people and being there for them? What's the kind of ground we're standing on? Way back in the Old Testament, Moses was called by God to deliver the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage. He was on the backside of a desert for 40 years before that, and he was piling up a bunch of brush to burn it. He did this every day. And all of a sudden, he piles up this brush, sets it on fire, and the brush is burning, but it doesn't burn up. It's not consumed. And out of that brush came this voice that said, "Moses, take off your sandals, for right now, you're standing on holy ground." What is it that makes something holy ground? I mean, I'm out here in the woods, and this ground is just dirt and mud. But what is it that makes something holy ground? Well, in Jesus' day, as he's walking up the bloody Via Dolorosa, and he's standing now before Pilate, and he's doing all these things for humanity, as his blood seeps into the ground, suddenly that blood makes that ground holy. It becomes holy ground. When our feet slip today, centuries later, and we fall on the shards of our own failure, and we need somebody to pick us up, Jesus comes along and says, "Hey, that's holy ground, because I'll pick you up." That the very place of condemnation, the very place of accusation, the very place of rejection is actually a starting place that will lead to a lonely hill where a garbage dump suddenly becomes a holy hill. So many times our feet grow accustomed to comfortable carpet, don't they? But if we can somehow catch the condemnation, the condemning of God's Son standing before Pilate, bearing a weight of a cross on his back, his identification with our lives is that it teaches us that humanity longs for us to make the ground that we walk, invited by the Holy Spirit of God. Suddenly, the ground we walk on can become holy ground. And the more broken a person is, the more condemned they feel, God says, "I'll use you to make a difference in their life." I was in a church recently where it was in the inner city, and I love the inner city areas. You know, every city has a bypass or a freeway or a loop that goes around the city, and a lot of churches are settled on the loop. I wanted to invest my life in the downtown area, and I went into this area of a metropolitan city where a lot of homeless people were. We were helping this church out, and I'll never forget standing in this church. I didn't have a lot of homeless friends. I didn't know who to talk to. And I was standing in this church, and suddenly I looked up, and coming down the center aisle was this man, dressed horribly. I could smell him 20 feet before he got to me. And I knew it was one of the homeless people that slept around the gutters and the ditches of this church. As he got closer to me, I realized that he wasn't walking well, and he was limping really bad with one leg. As he came up to me, I smelled him, and I reached in my pocket to get rid of him, and I grabbed a $5 bill and I gave it to him, and I said, "Man, here, this will help you. Hope it'll help you along your life's way. Just take it, enjoy, whatever you need." The man backed up and he looked at me, and he said, with a smirk on his face, "I don't want and I don't need your money." He said, "This Jesus you've been up here talking about to all these people while you've been in the pulpit talking, that's what I need." He said, "I live in a gutter. I'm going to die out here in these streets. I need God. All of a sudden, my pride, my arrogance, my need to get out of that church and go to a nice restaurant and have dinner suddenly collapsed around me. And I fell into this guy's arms. I put my face right in his chest. And I began to weep as I've never wept. He started crying. And suddenly I realized that God was speaking to me through a stinky homeless man. And it was as if God said to me, Brady, if you can't get used to this kind of smell on human beings, I can't use you anymore. All of a sudden, it transformed into the most beautiful scent I've ever smelt in my life. And I held on to this guy and I realized, wow, I need to connect with collapse. I have a connection with collapsed people. It changed my life forever. And I wonder today, can we imagine as Jesus walked the path to Calvary and the cross is on his back, his head as he collapses in the street, the bloody Via Dolorosa, that's cobblestone street, is still there to this day. His head hits the cobblestone. He falls, the crown of thorns, the Roman soldier beating him, saying, get up, get up. I thought you were God, get up. Can you see that today? That the Son of God collapses. And maybe Jesus collapses so that he can identify with the times in life that you and I collapse. If we can't see it, we better turn back and go back because we want too perfect of a trail. That's what religious people do. They just want a real nice cross with no blood and no anguish and no falls along the pathway till we get there. But if we can somehow see it, if we can somehow envision the collapsing of Christ under the weight of a cross, then we'll want to stop that suffering. We will care. We'll want to see a moment in life where God Himself collapsed under the weight of wood made out of trees that He created. And what about when we fall under the weight of our own crosses? I mean, I don't know about you, but every time I fall down on the path of my own life, my temptation is to stay low, wait for somebody to come rescue me. You know, when someone else collapses under the weight of their own cross, our tendency is don't get involved. It's their fault. We make up all kinds of reasons why we should keep on walking and not help them. But if we're the one that falls, what do? You see, the point is we've all fallen. We all have collapses. We all fall under the weight that is on our shoulders. Our lives are shattered pieces on a path, and our lives make mosaics, if you will, uniquely our own. And God still wants to love us and to care for us. And God does amazing work when we fall down at our lowest points. I read a book years ago talking about collapse. It was called Notes on the Art of Surgery. The particular man that wrote the book was a surgeon himself. And he recounts this moment that a young couple came in. And when this young couple came in for surgery, he realized that he was going to have to do some reconstructive surgery on the woman. She had had a stroke and it had a nerve damage in her mouth. It was kind of a strange thing, he said. But he went in to do the surgery and he realized that part of her tumor that had formed, that he didn't know was there, was wrapped around a little nerve in her mouth, and he had to cut the nerve where the tumor had wrapped around. When she came out of surgery, she said, "Am I okay?" And the surgeon said, I leaned over to her and I said, "Yeah, you're okay. But you had a tumor in your mouth and I had to cut the little nerve. I had to cut a place in your mouth. And now your mouth is going to be crooked forever." Her husband was standing there and he looked down at her and he said, "Oh, don't worry, hon. It's kind of cute. It's kind of sexy. I like it." And the surgeon said in that book, he said, "I was so close to them. It's almost as if I had a bold encounter with God." He said, "I looked as he leaned in to kiss his wife, he twisted his lips to accommodate how her lips were now twisted and kissed her on her crooked mouth to show her that no matter how bad it gets, their kiss would always still work. I don't know about you, but God sent Jesus Christ into this world to identify with the fallen, the collapsed, the broken. He himself fell on the pathway to Calvary to show us that the kiss still works. When I first started out, I didn't want my life to be ordinary. I didn't want my calling, my ministry, my endeavor into this thing to be common. I wanted my life to count for people all across the board. And I didn't know really what to do. I just knew that something was in me that called me to be more courageous. And an old mentor of mine said to me, he said, "Brady, if you will concentrate on the depth of your spiritual life, God will worry about the breadth of your spiritual life. Just keep having courage." And I think about that all the time. I think about how that my life, my ministry, everything I've tried to do for God and for good and for others has always been about helping others. And the crazy thing about it is that when I've needed help, God has always sent help. In the Bible, when Jesus was carrying his cross to Calvary, he collapses once, he collapses again. And they called a man out of the crowd as the streets were lined with people jeering and throwing rocks and throwing insults, hurling all kinds of stuff at him. All of a sudden, out of the crowd, God sends help. A man named Simon of Cyrene. Why was he in town that day? What was he doing there? Was there a sale at TJ Maxx for him? Was there a sale at the local department store? Why was he there? We don't know anything about this man. Who is this man who just steps into Scripture and then suddenly steps away and he's never heard from again? The truth of the matter is, once you step into the path of another who is fallen, who is down, your life is changed forever. And you know this in your own life. I mean, you can't help somebody who's hurting or broken and it not affect you. As the saying goes, one cannot help carry another to a place of victory and not be changed themselves. One cannot help carrying another's cross and not experience victory. For some crazy reason on that day, a man named Simon from Cyrene was called out of the crowd. It was his baptism of fire. The question I ask you is this: when has God called you out? When has God called you out from the tribe that you've been in, the pack that you run with, to do something more with your life? I know something about you. You long for something greater. You long for something more. And only when life calls us to be courageous and step out of the pack do we really live the way we should. You know, we will never do anything any more greater than when we're with somebody we love, especially when they're in need. If somebody's on their deathbed, we will break the bank. We will fly. We'll break the speed limit. We'll do whatever it takes to get to that person. I remember a few years ago when I was at one of the darkest moments of my life. My best friend at that time said to me, after I had a double whammy, I had two things devastating happen. One of them was my father passed away. My best friend looked at me and he said, "Brady, believe it or not, there's something beautiful up ahead." And I wanted to believe him, but the truth of the matter is it was hard for me to see beauty coming when I was fallen and I was that broken and I was in the darkest moment of my life. I wonder what Jesus thought when he was laying in the middle of the Via Dolorosa with a cross pressing his broken, bruised, and bloodied body to the ground, and suddenly a man picks up his cross off of him. It's kind of like we are today, isn't it? You know, when we have something weighing us down and we're falling, we want our pain to get over as soon as possible. I don't ever want to fall again. I don't ever want to have a problem. I don't ever want to deal with anything again. I want to have a straight, good path. And you got to be courageous. You see, here's the thing. If God's calling you to something, if God has a purpose on your life, if you're afraid to fall, you'll never walk this path. If you're afraid to fall, you'll never live the dreams and the visions that God has for you. If you're afraid to fall, then you're ultimately afraid to win. There's a family that have been a tightrope walking family for many generations. They're called the Flying Walendas. In 1978, Carl Walenda was walking on a wire between two buildings in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and he fell. And Carl's wife later said that for months before that particular moment that he fell to his death, all Carl could talk about was falling. All he could talk about was falling. He was worried. He put all of his energies into not falling rather than just getting up on the tightrope and taking off walking. There's a lesson for us there, is there not? The lesson is, where are we going to put our energies? Are we going to put our energies into worrying so much about not falling? If we do, we're never going to walk the path. Or can we change our perspective a little bit and say, even though I'm fallen, even though I'm broken, even though I've had moments to fall once, twice, 3 times, that on this way of life we have to walk without nets. This path doesn't have a net to catch us. But we wonder who will catch us. Jesus is our great example, that when he fell, somebody was there for him on that day. And guess what? Over 2,000 years later, when you fall, nail-scarred hands will catch you. So the question again is, where do you put your energy? On your fear of falling or on your courage that you have in the faith to never stop walking? So in this life you will stumble. We will. You'll stumble, I'll stumble. This is a rocky path, this thing called life. We have fears, we have failure, we have pain, and all of these moments put us on our face. And our tendency is to, not quit, not stop until we fall. And then our tendency is to give up completely. We slip on peels of pride and arrogance sometimes. We have rocks of remorse. We fall. We have people that push us down, but then we also do things ourselves to keep ourselves down. And when we get bruised and we get examined by others and we get, bloodied and hurt, falling is easy. Getting back up is the hard part. And I want today in this moment to be a day where you begin to say, you know what, I'm going to get my courage back, my Christ courage to get back up. We all fall. We all fall. What do you do when you fall for somebody that you love with all of your heart, but then the relationship ends? What do you do when you fall for the least of these, as Jesus said? Whenever you fall for the least of these, you've actually fallen for me. Jesus fell and somebody was there to pick him up. Let me tell you about 3 falls. One day, a woman that I know was diagnosed with MS. Not long after that was fall number 1, and not long after that, suddenly she was robbed at knife point, and the thief stabbed her in the hand, and she lost use of her hand. The 3rd fall which was a good fall for her, believe it or not. She was suddenly surrounded by the grace and mercy of Christ, and she gave her life to Jesus. So 3 falls, diagnosed with MS at a young age, stabbed and robbed, lost use of her hand, and then she gave her life to God. You see, the life that we live is measured by these moments of falls and trips. And Jesus himself fell 3 times. And I don't know about you, but a lot of times we have a lot of doubt that comes in life. How often have I invited doubt over for dinner? 17 years ago, a woman's daughter was murdered by her son-in-law. And she recently said to me, she said, I continue to try to forgive him for murdering my daughter. And I thought to myself as I walked away from that conversation, that's a courageous woman. Because the issue is not, did she forgive him? The issue becomes, does she try to forgive? That's an important moment in anybody's life when they say, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to try again. I had 2 childhood best friends. They've been literally best friends since they were in the crib. One day, one of the friends became terminally ill, and wasn't long after that her husband of 20-something years left her because he couldn't handle her disease anymore. Her friend suddenly couldn't get a hold of her and couldn't talk to her. And she even said, when I could get around her, she was closed up. All this terminally ill state that she was in, the loss of her husband, the loss of her job, everything suddenly put her in a state where she was just done with life. And she said, I could hug her, but I couldn't really reach her. And I wonder if that's not the way God is with some of us. Maybe God is like that with us, that he tries to hug us, but he can't reach us. So in review, maybe the woman whose daughter was murdered by her son-in-law knows something about falling and having to get really courageous to muster all the courage she can to get back up and try. Maybe the friend who was the best friend of the terminally ill woman who prays to die every day. Her husband left her. She's in a terminally ill state of her life. Maybe she knows something about falling. You see, it's not easy falling. It's not easy being crucified. It's not easy walking this path. Some people are nailed by a cross. Some people are nailed by a loss. And we live on this path walking through what we know to be losses and crosses every day of our lives. And losses and crosses pound our souls to the ground. And we have to become courageous. We have to become courageous to get back up. Our souls hear the pounding of nails, the pounding of our flesh. Years ago, I remember one of my favorite old game shows. It was called Name That Tune, where they would play just a little snippet out of a song, and you could name that tune. And the first one to hit the buzzer and name the tune, they won a prize. I think on the path of freedom, when it comes to gaining fresh courage, we don't need to name that tune. We need to name the pain. I know so many people that live in bitterness that doesn't seem to go away. Just a sense of sludge that they walk through every day. And I think some of the reason why people carry so much unforgiveness and bitterness in their life is because they refuse to name the pain. That when there's no other place to name pain, when we kiss the wood of Christ's cross, when we find ourselves buried in our own blood, that if you listen to the hammer and the nails, you will also hear God say, you know what? I love you. I share in your pain. I've come to this earth to bear your pain. Every bit of it, your past, your present, and your future. Think about it this way. When Christ died on the cross, every bit of your pain, all of it, was all in the future. See, the most difficult thing I believe in life is not just the pain. It's the difficulty of having to carry it many times alone. But the cross shouts today, you will never have to walk this path alone again. In fact, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, he said 7 statements that have blown theologians' minds for years. And one of the statements that was one of the most courageous statements was, I thirst. Have you ever been so thirsty you'd do anything for a drink of water? I mean, you just were dying. I have to get water. There are areas of this world that you have to go in and dig down hundreds of feet just to find a little bit of water. In our generation, we thirst for many things, don't we? We thirst for fame and fortune. I mean, you watch the American Idol shows and The Voice and all of these shows, talent shows, trying to bring people who are thirsting for fame and fortune. But ultimately, if you take all of that away, our lives, you know what we thirst for? We want our lives to matter. I know something about you. You want your life to matter. You want to know that you're making a difference in this world. But we're so afraid of death many times, you know. We're so afraid to die. But I think many times, even more so, we're more afraid that we'll die, not ever leaving a mark, not releasing the baggage of yesterday. I remember years ago, I was booked to speak at a certain conference. And when I was booked to speak at this certain conference, they said to me, they said, we're going to pay all of your expenses. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I got to the airport, I landed, I picked up my bags, and I walked out, and there was a stretch limousine picking me up. I didn't have any money to tip the man picking my bags up, so I quickly asked him to pop the trunk, and I threw my bags in, and he looked at me and he said, I've got your bags, man, you're okay. And I go, no, I got it. We got to the hotel. He pulls up to the valet area, and the valet guys come walking out, and they walk around, and I pushed them aside, and I said, no, I've got these bags. The guys were like, no, you're booked at this conference. We've got your bags for you. And I said, no, I'm carrying my own bags. I walked inside with my own bags, and the lady at the front desk, at the concierge desk, she said, Mr. Weldon, we're so glad you're here. Here's your room, and here's everything taken care of. And she said, let me get the valet guy to come and take your bags to your room. And I said, no. See, she didn't know it. I didn't have any cash. I didn't have any money on me. And she said, you don't understand. She said, you are being paid for. Everything is being paid for on this trip for you. I said, but I don't have any cash to tip the valet guy. She said, come here. And she actually pulled me around to the computer at her desk and said, do you see this? It said paid in full. You know what I realized? I was lugging around all this baggage, and I don't travel light. I was carrying all this baggage around, and it had already been paid for somebody else to carry it for me. Guess what? I don't know you today, but I guarantee you're carrying some baggage around that Jesus Christ has already paid for you to let go of. He's already paid the price. So drop the baggage, get some fresh courage, and be ready to live again. Just start trying. You'll be glad you did. He told me to tell you so. Well, we come to the end of our path, but that's not the end result, is it? This path may have ended, but there's a new beginning starting, a comeback, if you will. What happened on that dark Friday was Jesus hung, he bled, he died. And they took him off of the cross and they laid him in a tomb. And they put a rock over the tomb. They said, we're done with him, it's over. Satan and his minions said, it's over, we're done. Humanity will never get their heart back. It's over. All the courage, all the collapsing, all of it, it's done. All the condemnation, it'll sit on humanity forever. But how many of you know that guess what? There was time for a comeback. And early on that Easter morning, just before the breaking of day, the rock began to rattle, it rolled out of the way, and Christ came out alive. Massive comeback. And now there is freedom for all of humanity. No matter how broken you are, no matter how wounded you may be, no matter how shattered, there is always hope for a comeback. I heard about a father and a son who were camping one day out in the woods, and suddenly a forest fire had started around them and they didn't know it. And the fire was coming from the north, the south, the east, and the west. All of the wind was swirling. And the father grabbed his son and said, son, let's get over here. And he took his son to a spot that had already been burned by fire. The dad said, son, sit down in this burnt spot and sit here and wait. And the son said, Dad, why am I going to sit here? Why am I supposed to sit here in this burnt spot? And the dad said, son, because the fire cannot burn where it's already burned. Just stay right here. Well, guess what? If the fire has already burned Jesus, it will never burn you. You're free, and you can make a comeback. A friend of mine was driving one day with his son in the car, and the car seat was in the back. The son was in the car seat, playing and having a good time while they were driving down the road. All of a sudden, this kid starts screaming out, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. The dad looks in the rearview mirror as he's driving, and there's a bee buzzing around the son's head. Well, the son didn't seem to remember that Daddy was a professional beekeeper. And all of a sudden, the son's screaming, but the dad looked in the rearview mirror and saw the type of bee that it was. And he realized that's one of those bees that doesn't have a stinger. It can't sting. And so he said, son, don't worry, this bee doesn't have a stinger. All it can do is go buzz, buzz, buzz. Well, guess what? Today, there is freedom because the enemy no longer has a stinger. He cannot touch you because you can make a comeback because Christ made a comeback, and the enemy, all he can do is buzz around you. So walk this path well, live well, don't give up, keep going, keep striving, never quit. There's always hope for a comeback on the path to freedom. God bless you.